February 26, 1991, 4 p.m. local time. The Iraqi desert. The weather is not just bad. It is apocalyptic. A shamal, a violent, blinding sandstorm, has descended upon the borderlands between Iraq and Kuwait, turning the horizon into a churning wall of brown opacity. Visibility has plummeted to less than 50 meters, and the wind howls at 60 miles per hour, stripping paint from steel and reducing the world to a swirling void of beige. To the naked eye, the world ends at the tip of your own hand. Inside the cramped, sweltering turrets of T-72 tanks belonging to the Tawakalna division of the Republican Guard, the mood is tense but not yet panicked. These are the elite, the steel fist of Baghdad, battle-hardened by 8 brutal years of war against Iran. They are dug in, their hulls buried deep in the sand with only their low-profile turrets exposed in classic defensive kill zones. According to every military manual written since the Second World War, this weather should have paused the battle. Air support is grounded, helicopters cannot fly, and laser rangefinders should be scattered by the dust. The Soviet advisors who trained these men followed a simple, dictates-driven reality. If you cannot see the enemy cannot see you. The Iraqi commanders peer through their periscopes, seeing nothing but a grainy wall of sand. Intelligence says the Americans are miles away, bogged down and blind. The Iraqis believe they have the advantage of stationary concealment, ready to ambush any enemy that stumbles into their line. Then the impossible happens. There is no muzzle flash, no sound of a distant engine, and no warning. Suddenly, a T-72 in the Iraqi line simply ceases to exist. 1 second, it is a 45-ton war machine. The next, a catastrophic explosion tears the turret purely off the chassis, tossing the 12-ton steel cap into the air like a toy as the ammunition carousel inside ignites. Confusion screams over the radio net as another tank 500 meters to the left erupts in flames. The Iraqis frantically traverse their turrets, scanning the brown void for an invisible assassin that is systematically dismantling the pride of the Republican Guard with mathematical precision, hitting turret rings through a storm that has reduced visibility to zero. This defies every law of physics they know. The radio network of the Tawakalna division quickly dissolves into a cacophony of static and terror. Inside the command tracks, senior Iraqi officers stare at their tactical maps in utter paralysis, watching as grid squares that should be secure are reported as lost. According to their doctrine, they are protected by a screen of scouts, a minefield, and the blinding curtain of the sandstorm. But the reports screaming through the speakers tell a story that defies logic. Entire battalions are being deleted in minutes. In traditional military theory, a unit is considered combat ineffective after taking 30% casualties. Here, units are suffering 100% losses in less than 10 minutes. Desperate to regain control, the brigade commander orders a counterattack. If they cannot see the enemy from their defensive holes, they must move to close the distance to what they call knife fighting range, under 800 meters, where they believe their lower quality optics won't matter. As hundreds of engines roar to life and the T-72s lurch out of their sand berms, the gunners resort to their last technological hope, the Luna infrared searchlight. Mounted next to the main gun, these large circular emitters blast beams of infrared light forward. To the Iraqi gunners, the world suddenly gains a grainy green hue, allowing them to see the dunes and the burning wrecks of their comrades. They feel a momentary surge of relief, believing they have regained their sight. However, they do not realize they have just signed their own death warrants. To the American M1A1 Abrams crews waiting in the storm, those infrared searchlights do not look like faint beams. Through their advanced sensors, they look like supernovas. The Iraqis are unknowingly holding up flares in a dark room, screaming their exact coordinates into the void. The massacre accelerates as the American tanks identify these heat signatures and put rounds directly into the light sources. An Iraqi gunner might catch a glimpse of a low, angular shadow 1,000 meters away and fire, but the T-72's primitive stabilization and laser rangefinders, scattering off the dust particles, cause the shells to fly harmlessly over the targets. Before they can even begin the 7-second process of reloading, the retribution arrives in the form of a silver streak. This streak is a kinetic energy penetrator, a long rod of depleted uranium moving at nearly Mach 5. When it slams into the glassy plate of a T-72, It does not explode in the traditional sense. Instead, the sheer friction and pressure liquefy the armor, allowing the rod to punch through the thickest steel the Soviet Union ever designed for export as if it were wet cardboard. The interior of the tank is instantly superheated, and the resulting overpressure kills the crew before their nervous systems can even register the sound of the impact. From the outside, the tank simply shudders and begins to pour thick, oily smoke from its hatches as the impossible event transforms into a total massacre. The Republican Guard, despite being dug in and heavily armored, is being erased by an enemy they still have not seen. To the surviving Iraqi crews, this is no longer a conventional war. It is sorcery. They are being hunted by something that sees without eyes and kills without flame, turning the Sandstorm, which was supposed to be their greatest defensive ally, into their tomb. As the surviving tanks attempt to retreat, reversing blindly into the swirling dust, they find the trap has already snapped shut. The ghost is no longer just in front of them. Explosions are now rocking their flanks, and the radio net has dissolved into a cacophony of terror. Inside an Iraqi BMP command vehicle, the scene is one of utter paralysis as senior officers stare at maps where entire battalions are being marked as non-operational in less than 10 minutes. The Iraqi strategy had relied on a specific Soviet calculation known as the exchange ratio. They knew NATO tanks were superior, but they believed that for every 3 T-72s lost, they would destroy one American tank, a winning ratio in a defensive war. But as the dust chokes the battlefield, that ratio stands at 0 to 50. The Americans have bypassed the laws of optics entirely, and in doing so, they have collapsed the Cold War balance of power in the middle of the Iraqi desert. What exactly was this technology that allowed the Americans to see through the impenetrable veil of the Iraqi desert? The mystery of the ghost in the sand was not magic, but physics, decided years earlier inside laboratories in Texas during the 1970s. The device that annihilated the Tawakkala division was the N/VSG-2 thermal imaging system. To understand why this was such a shock, one must understand the massive gamble the Soviet Union made during the Cold War. A gamble they lost catastrophically. For decades, night vision meant one thing: image intensification. This is the classic grainy footage often seen in cinema, which works by taking existing light from the moon or stars and amplifying it thousands of times. If it is pitch black, or if there is too much smoke or dust, the light scatters and the image becomes a useless white blur. The Soviets had perfected this technology, equipping their T-72 tanks with excellent image intensifiers under the assumption that the next Great War would be fought with this gear. However, American scientists realized that image intensification had a fatal flaw. It relied on visible light. On a modern battlefield, visible light is too easily blocked by smoke, fog, sand, and camouflage. Consequently, the United States military pivoted to a completely different part of the electromagnetic spectrum: thermal energy. The M1 Abrams gunner was not looking for light. He was looking for heat. Every object in the universe with a temperature above absolute zero emits thermal radiation, and the hotter it is, the more it emits. A T-72 tank engine operates at over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and even the friction of its tracks against the sand creates massive heat signatures. The genius of the American thermal sight was its ability to detect long-wave infrared radiation. Visible light cannot pass through a sandstorm because the particles of sand are roughly the same size as the wavelength of visible light, effectively blocking it. But long-wave infrared waves are much larger. They are huge compared to the dust particles. When thermal radiation travels from an Iraqi tank toward an American sensor, it simply flows around the dust particles. To the thermal sensor, the sandstorm was literally transparent. While the Iraqi gunners were staring into a wall of brown dust, the American gunners were looking at a high-contrast black and white television screen where the enemy tanks glowed like bright white light bulbs against a dark background. This impossible accuracy happened because the thermal sight could spot heat differences of a fraction of a degree, allowing an Abrams computer to distinguish the hot engine deck of a T-72 from a cold rock at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. The psychological impact of being targeted with such precision through total concealment was shattering. Iraqi crews began to bail out of perfectly functional tanks, preferring to take their chances with the elements rather than stay inside what they now realized were target magnets. They had realized a horrifying truth. The tank was no longer a weapon. It was a trap. To a soldier trained in the analog era of warfare, where you aim with your eye and shoot what you see, this new reality was supernatural. The enemy was omnipresent, silent, and never missed. Even when the Iraqis attempted to use more advanced tactical concealment, it backfired. A veteran Iraqi captain made a desperate decision to fall back on the oldest survival tactic, pop smoke. His platoon fired phosphorus smoke grenades, creating a thick white wall designed to block visible light and scatter laser beams. Combined with the sandstorm, the visibility was effectively negative, and the captain believed that if he was blind, the Americans must be too. He ordered his drivers to cut their engines to reduce their noise signature and sat in the silent, swirling white void, waiting for an ambush. According to Soviet manuals, they were now invisible. But they were about to learn that the phosphorus smoke was also transparent to long-wave infrared. Because the smoke was cool and the sand was cool, the 40-ton radiator that was a T-72 stood out even more vividly. The American gunner barely had to aim. The smoke that the Iraqi captain thought was saving him was actually framing him for the kill. The American computer calculated the lead, the wind, the temperature, and the barometric pressure in a fraction of a second. Inside the Iraqi tank, the captain reached for his canteen, feeling a false sense of security in the silence. He never heard the shot because the depleted uranium dart was traveling faster than the speed of sound. The projectile moved so fast that the physics of solid matter simply broke down, causing the armor to flow like liquid as it was perforated. This scene repeated itself up and down the line. Iraqi crews tried to hide in hull-down positions behind sand berms, but the heat of their exhaust plumes rose above the earthworks, giving the Americans a perfect aiming point to shoot right through the top of the mounds. They tried to power down their tanks to go cold, but a 40-ton block of steel takes hours to lose its thermal signature. In the freezing desert night, a warm tank actually glowed brighter against the chilling backdrop. To the surviving Iraqi infantry huddled in their foxholes, the sight of the advancing American line was the final psychological blow. They expected to see monsters bristling with radar dishes and searchlights. Instead, they saw flat, angular slabs of steel painted a dull tan, rolling through the apocalypse in total blackout mode with dark glass slits that looked like dead eyes. The mystery that decimated the fourth-largest army in the world in less than 23 minutes lay inside that small, unassuming box next to the gunner's face, a technology once classified higher than nuclear bomb codes. The Cold War ended that day not with a nuclear bang, but with the silent, glowing image of a T-72 burning in the night, destroyed by an enemy it never even saw. The M1 Abrams proved that, in the modern age, information is the ultimate armor. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the machines that defined history, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.